So to start, let's just make sure we have a shared understanding about how we're understanding a problem and also the problem solving process. In school-based settings and school-based practices, we generally describe a problem as a discrepancy. It's sort of where you would want a student to perform and where their current performance is. So in the problem solving process, we literally are just trying to close the gap. We're trying to close the gap between where they currently are performing and what's desired. And we typically use a systematic process to do that, to solve that problem. And that process is a pretty old model, actually. It's a 2002 citation, but it's a pretty old model of following a 4-stage problem solving approach, which is first just identifying the problem in very clear operationalized terms. So when we say define a problem, we want it to be so specific and clear that even a person who hasn't been involved with the student could walk into the classroom and know how to identify that problem. So we're talking in very clear terms. Problem analysis is where we then go about collecting data to understand the current status of the problem and also what factors could be contributing to that problem occurring or being maintained. And then plan implementation is simply creating a plan or an intervention to actually then close that gap, right, to address that concern. And then in plan evaluation, it is to evaluate and see if it's working. Are we using interventions and strategies and approaches that are actually addressing the problem? So in a nutshell, that's what we're doing when we're problem solving in school-based settings. That problem solving, though, does occur in a couple of different formats. It can occur at an individual level, meaning a teacher could support a student one-on-one, or a school psychologist could work with a student one-on-one. But it also can occur in a team-based approach or a team-based structure. And so today, I'm going to be focusing on the team-based structure. How do we problem solve using teams? Now, there are anybody who spent any time in schools know there are lots of different types of teams in schools. Teams for almost every type of thing. We have teams for IEP teams, which are for special education evaluations. We have problem solving teams. There might be grade level teams. There are lots of different types of teams operating in school-based settings. Generally, for problem solving teams, we're talking about interdisciplinary teams of educators that are coming together to solve problems. Generally, this is before a student is referred for an evaluation for special education. So problem-solving teams are structured and designed to address concerns when they first start to emerge in the classroom setting, in the general ed classroom setting, in order to maintain the student in the general ed setting. What are changes that we can make in general ed so that the problem doesn't get worse, the student doesn't fall further behind, so on and so forth. And problem solving teams came out of, the strongest push for them came out of the need to address the issue of overrepresentation of minoritized students in special ed. So when the first special education law was codified back in 1975, we already were seeing an overrepresentation of minority students in special education. Actually, it was even occurring before that in the more informal structures, in the informal settings. So we can even go back to compulsory attendance and start to see how minoritized students were being excluded from educational settings. But as we formalized special education in 1975, we started to be able to more specifically track and see that data and understand that we were having minority students being overrepresented in special education. And there's sometimes a question about what do we mean when we talk about overrepresentation. Generally, we're saying if the percent of students of a specific group is significantly higher in representation in special education compared to their representation in the general population. So let's say your school is, 10% Black, and then 40% of your students in special education are Black. That would be an overrepresentation because the percent is so outsized for their actual representation in the actual body of the student population. So the push for problem solving teams was to say, maybe we can reduce bias if we bring multiple people together to solve the problem before we even make a referral. And we have to document that, we have to evaluate that in order to ensure that we're providing high quality services to particularly minoritized students in a school-based setting. So there's an assumption that teams inherently reduce bias. and that just through the process of teaming, we will better serve minoritized students. And I just want you to hold that in your thinking at this time, that teams in and of themselves can reduce bias because of the multiple perspectives. So the whole purpose then is really to improve performance in the classroom, in the general ed classroom, in order to prevent students from being referred for special education or evaluation rather. I want to also just note that the prevention part of this process is significant, because once a student is referred for a special education evaluation, our data indicates that about 90+% of those students will be placed in special education. So even just being referred, it is very likely that that student will be placed into special education. And you'll have educators report that, well, I made the referral because we don't have any other supports, or we don't have any other assistance, or we don't have enough resources. And what I am arguing is that that is not a reason to refer a student for special education. We want to have accurate referrals, for special education to meet the needs of those students who actually need them, and not become a catch-all just because you're having some difficulties knowing how to best teach or serve or educate a student in the general education classroom. So the prevention piece here is significant. So with that being said, what do we know about teams? Do they actually work? Do problem-solving teams work? The data on this, in terms of, if you look at our reviews of research on problem-solving teams, is a bit complicated in terms of the picture that it presents. Generally, under research conditions, so let's say you have researchers who are going in with teams of graduate students, working with school-based professionals to create teams, support them, support their structures, their operations, their functioning. Under research conditions, we do see that teams they're efficacious. They can work to reduce the number of referrals for special ed, including for racially minoritized students, which is the populations that have been studied the most, and also increase student performance and well-being. So we've seen that under research conditions. So we know that teams can work. The problem is that we're not seeing that level of effectiveness translate into practice. So the effectiveness of teams, when we actually look at school-based practices, is a lot more mixed and a lot more uneven. And one of our key indicators of that is the continued overrepresentation of minoritized youth. One of the major reasons why we have teams is to address the issue of overrepresentation. And overrepresentation has persisted with us since 1975. It is a baseline feature of special education in the United States. And so we have not been able to have a lot of movement on that, despite the proliferation, the growth, the movement around creating problem-solving teams in school-based settings. And so it begs the question, what is happening in the school-based settings where we're not able to translate this efficacious practice into an effective, regular practice in a day-to-day school-based setting? And that's the question that I have. Those are the questions that I ask and that I want to know. How do we start to actually improve problem-solving teams so that they are more effective and living up to their promise for supporting minoritized youth in school-based settings? And so there's been lots of research and lots of factors identified that help us to try to understand why teams don't work as well in school-based settings, or rather problem-solving teams, I want to be clear. One of those reasons is just a lack of adherence to process. So just the structures that we create to have a systematic problem-solving process, identifying a problem, collecting data, using that data to inform intervention, and then evaluating, breaks down in school-based settings a lot of times. And when that breakdown occurs, we don't have the integrity that we need in order to expect that the process will work as intended. So that happens for lots of reasons. Teams aren't even though they're very commonplace in schools, the very structure of schools is antithetical in a lot of ways of educators coming together as teams. One example of that is making time for the teams to actually meet. So if teachers are teaching in the classrooms all day, the administrators have to, be in the office and seeing students and families and doing administrative work. You have your, service support personnel like school psychologists, nurses, social workers, all engaged in their day-to-day activity. There's literally a significant challenge to even create the time in the day for teams to meet. So there are very significant structural reasons why teams struggle to have accurate or sort of adherence to actual process. And that's just one example of what that could look like and why process breaks down in school-based settings. Lack of knowledge, so team members may not understand the concerns being presented to them. We know that this is especially true when it comes to mental health. There's certainly a big, strong push now in education to make schools more trauma informed, make sure educators are more trauma informed, but just in general, understanding mental health, children's mental health especially, and how to best support students who might be experiencing some mental health difficulties is an area where we need significant amount of growth in the school-based setting, and what is the role for educational professionals in that kind of work. But if I don't understand that and I have a student presenting to me with, depression, we may not know what the supports are to put in place and how to problem solve to support this student. There's, of course, the wide range of variability just in terms of what's considered typical or normal behavior. So teams may struggle with knowing, is this a problem? Is it not a problem? What's typical? What's not typical? And then what I want to, sort of highlight and focus on in the work that I do is the difficulty with grappling with individual and cultural differences, as well as educator subjectivity that can be complicated by biases, stereotypes, and prejudices. These are the two areas where we are really trying to understand what belief systems, values, perspectives, attitudes educators bring to the process of problem solving, and how might those beliefs, values, perspectives manifest themselves when we're trying to help students. One of the most important messages that I try to communicate to educators is that you can be very well intended and want to help. And that is your goal, that is your mission, is to be helpful. And in your process, still be harmful to children. You can still be harmful to children. And that's something that's important to reconcile. When we understand biases and how they operate and stereotypes and prejudices, we need to be able to come to terms with, when we hold biases, stereotypes, prejudices, it doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, I'm such a terrible person, let me leave the room and not participate. No, it's to say, let me acknowledge and recognize what these are. How do I start to first, do the work of, sort of disabusing myself or absolving or sort of working through these biases and stereotypes so that they don't impact my work. They don't impact how I serve students. That's the work that you have to do. So you want to understand that you can be well-intentioned, but holding these biases, stereotypes, prejudices, or worldviews or perspectives that are harmful to kids and families can also coexist with your intent to help. Those two things can be true at the same time, which is why you have to be a critically reflective educator to know, where are my biases, where are my stereotypes, where are my prejudices, and how might they manifest themselves so that you can better get a handle on that, you can better check it, you can better control it, so that it's not influencing how you're serving kids. So how do we bring that kind of understanding around individual cultural differences and educator subjectivity into the problem solving process? We're trying to embed our understanding of the challenges of us self-reflecting on individual cultural differences and subjectivity into the systematic problem solving process, that it is a part of what we do. This is important because a lot of times when we're talking about subjectivity, one is that a person may not recognize that they hold biases, stereotypes, and prejudices. That's one challenge. But the second piece is that it seems like sometimes like it's an add-on or something extra that you're doing on top of your regular work. And the notion here is that it's not on top of your regular work. It is your work. This is integrated into your work. So us acknowledging and understanding our biases, our stereotypes, our prejudices, it is core to every single thing that we do. And so we have to make it a systematic, ingrained, required component of all of our work. So that's what I'm talking about with culturally responsive problem solving, is how to make this an ingrained, commonplace part of how we approach our work. So with that, culturally responsive problem solving is really an approach. It's a perspective on how we understand diversity. How we understand diversity in our schools, how we understand diversity even more largely than that in terms of our society, you know, on multiple levels. That we have to recognize that with diversity comes difference in how we think, feel, behave, perceive the world, all of those things. We bring those perspectives as educators, our families, our kids, our community members, they're all coming together, right? And it's important for me to say that culturally responsive problem solving is not just about, oh, this is something I need to think about when I'm serving Black students. No, it's something we think about with all of our students. It's something we think about with every person that we're working with. That is the very definition of diversity. But what I would argue is that there is a much more significant need to focus on this when we're talking about minoritized children and families because of their marginalization in school-based settings. The way in which we exclude, dismiss, and denigrate difference is the problem. And so this is to help us not do that and instead embrace, understand, and value difference. This is what we're trying to do as a part of our process. And so we can recognize that people can be different and that is not a problem. And that we need to adapt as educators in order to meet that need. That is literally our charge. Our charge is to adapt, to make the system work for lots of different types of kids and families, because that's who we serve. We serve lots of different kids and families. And it's not for us to try to hold on to the rigidity of our systems because that's the way that they've been. When we consider historical marginalization, a lot of the ways in which we think about pedagogy, a lot of ways in which we think about learning may not have included the students and families that you serve. So you want to make sure you're not further excluding them by holding on to the rigidity of this is the way we've always done things. We have to be more flexible and adaptable to meet the needs of the kids and families that we serve. So the onus is always on educators to change. The onus is on us to change, to be adaptable, to be flexible. It is not on us to say, how do I fix this kid and make them fit into this system? That's not what we do. That's really important. So we have to shift our thinking. We have to shift our thinking, because the first thing we say when a kid manifests an academic difficulty, oh, something is wrong with this kid. We need to do something about this kid and or their family, instead of saying, what's wrong with how I'm teaching? What's wrong with how I'm managing my classroom? What's wrong with how I'm engaging with this student interpersonally? That should be our first question. That's what cultural responsiveness is about, is recognizing that the onus is on us as educators. So how do we start to do that? We have to recognize that this is not a tool. I've in working in schools in the time that I have, not that long, but in the time that I have, the first thing that people say is, okay, give me the tool, Markeda, give me the sheet, the protocol, that's like the checklist of the things, or what's the intervention, the one intervention that I need to do for all the Black students, right? Like that's usually where people are going, that you're gonna give me some instrument, some tool that I can just walk through. And when I walk through that tool, then problem solve. Okay, I'm done. No. In general, I would just submit, anytime you're thinking about how to better serve a diverse population, you are always thinking about this as a critical thinking reflective process. That's what you always are doing. There will rarely ever be a tool and intervention that works for enough of the diversity that you serve. It's just not possible. So even if we can just start to rework our thinking that we are always engaging in a critically reflective process to adapt, modify, and change our practices, and not necessarily that there's just one tool that will help us to get there. So as we enter problem solving, it's about changing how we think. That's what we're trying to do. We're changing how we think, and that's very difficult because we just are very ingrained in some of the ways we think and see and perceive in the world. We have to recognize that for ourselves, but we're trying to actually engage in a way that we can start to be more flexible, more adaptable in our understanding of how we see problems, and then the factors that are contributing to those problems. Did I see a post in the chat? I just want to, before I move. No? Okay. So what I'm going to do today is give like a snippet of the work that I've been doing to advance this culturally responsive approach to problem solving. As I noted, it's a 4-stage process that obviously has much more development around it in terms of what it looks like for a team to engage in this work. But I'm going to focus on the problem identification stage as the first stage in the process. This is where we're coming together to initially identify what is actually going on here and why. What is the problem here and why is this problem occurring? That's what we're going to focus on as the first step. But if you really are interested in knowing a lot more, I did write an entire team guide based on this approach for the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, their state Department of Ed. And so I linked that here if you want to see the full layout of this process, and they are working to integrate this model into all of their schools in the state. And so that work has been going on for a couple years now, but this guide sort of encapsulates a lot of that work. But as I said, we don't have time today to go through all of that, but if you want to know more, I included it here for you to check that out. But today we're going to focus on just starting to think about identifying the problem. And how do we do that? So how do I take a culturally responsive approach, this rethinking, this changing thinking approach to identifying a problem when it occurs in a school-based setting? And remember, we're generally talking about kids in a general education setting, and our focus certainly is to make sure people understand how to do this, particularly when you're serving minoritized youth. So there are 2 strategies, if you will, that I'm going to talk about in terms of problem identification that we can use that helps us to address the ways in which stereotypes, biases, and prejudices can manifest themselves in a team-based setting, and how do we start to challenge that thinking and move in a different direction. Those 2 strategies are reframing deficit-based attributions, and the second one is developing low inference alterable hypotheses. So we're going to go through both of those. All right. So as I explained, when teams come together, typically they may get a referral from a classroom teacher that is saying, I'm having, Johnny is having difficulty, reading on grade level. And I need to, I've tried everything. I need some support from the team to help me figure out what I can do to help Johnny. Okay, that's typically sort of what would happen when referrals come to problem-solving teams. One of the things that we find that commonly happens is that the team members may move to using deficit-based attributions. They may move to deficit thinking. And so many of you may have heard deficit thinking before and understand that it's a way in which we pathologize or problematize people generally for just who they are. That's deficit-based thinking. We're attributing problems to within-person factors, typically aspects of a person's identity and relatedly their culture. This is an important distinction to make here is sometimes people say, well, I'm just saying that they can't read on grade level. Is that like that's a deficit? That's something that they can't do? Well, no, you're identifying, a skill that, they may not be currently performing, right? That's not deficit-based thinking. Deficit-based thinking is when you're saying, Johnny isn't reading on grade level because he's lazy. And you tend to say that about the Black students. Because then now you're linking the laziness to being Black, right? So that now becomes the deficit-based attribution to the problem that we're trying to address. So when deficit-based attributions manifest themselves on the team, one of the strategies we can use is reframing. How do we take, you're right, this student is not performing on grade level, but we need to help you rethink why you think this student is not performing on grade level. This is significant. This is a very important piece to reframe why you think this student is not performing on grade level. And so what we have to realize is attributions are critical to helping us understand. I want to make sure I didn't skip a slide. Yeah, okay. Are critical to helping us understand how a person is thinking about a problem. How are they conceptualizing the problem? And so we see this manifest in 3 common ways on teams, in school-based teams, where we see the manifestation of deficit-based attributions. And I'm gonna just move my screen a little bit here. So unfounded attributions is one of the first ways, not first, but one of the ways in which we see deficit-based attributions manifesting themselves on teams. What does that look like? That basically means these are rationales or reasons for a problem for which we have no evidence that it is true. We have no evidence that it's true. So you may have a team member say, well, yeah, Johnny's having problems with reading because I've been trying to get mom on the phone and she doesn't even care about Johnny's education. And that's why Johnny's struggling in reading. And team members will say, oh yeah, yeah, makes sense. What evidence do you have that the parent doesn't care about their child and their child's education? How do you know that? You're assuming that to be true. No one is even raising that question, you know, with that you're making this, you know, that you're actually making this unfounded attribution. And not only that, no one is challenging it. No one is challenging it. Now we all are going to operate with, well, the real reason that Johnny isn't performing on grade level is because Johnny's parents don't care. That's the real reason. So when you have that thinking, what is the intervention? What is our role in supporting Johnny? And that will be the next logical question, because then when that question is asked, you'll realize, I guess we really are not addressing that. We really are not intervening on that. What we do instead is come up with something that doesn't really make sense in terms of an intervention, that doesn't really address the problem. And then Johnny continues to fail. Because we are really understand that the issue is something that is not out of our control. It's something that we don't even have an ability to impact. And let alone the fact that, as I said, there's no evidence that it's true. And I just like to say, when I use this example, because it happens so frequently, that even if a parent isn't coming into to meetings in a school, it does not absolve any educator of their responsibility to educate that student. And too often we'll say, well, the mom won't come into a meeting, or the parents won't answer my calls, or they're not responding, they don't come to parent-teacher conferences, or what have you, as if that is in any way a reason to say that you should not do your job. You still do your job as an educator, whether or not the parent is coming into the building or not. Now my question would be, why is the parents are not coming into the building, and what role do you play in that? That would be my next question. What role do you play in that? Why parents are not coming into your building? That's the conversation you should be having. And what about this place, about this experience of coming here, is making it such that parents are not coming in? That would be the next question. So that's one way, unfounded attributions that are not, there's no evidence, we don't know they're true, we're just making an assumption. We also have untrue attributions. And these are ones where people are making causal connections, causal links that are not true, that are not accurate. So if you have team members that are saying, well, Johnny isn't performing on grade level because Johnny's family lives in poverty. No, there is not a causal link between living in poverty and having reading difficulties. That's just not true. And we want to be really clear, anytime a person is trying to link a person's identity to a cause of an academic or behavioral concern, that link does not exist. Now, a follow-up question that I sometimes get to this is, Well, what about, when you have the disproportionate, discipline, right? Like, a lot of the Black students are being expelled, or a lot of the Black students are failing reading. Doesn't that mean there's something going on with the Black students? No. What that means is there's something going on with how the Black students are being treated. There's something going on with how Black students are being educated. There's something going on with how we're interacting and engaging with our Black students. There's something going on with the fact that our curriculum or our pedagogy or our management strategies are not appropriate, responsive to, supportive of our Black students. So the problem is not centered on the identity. The problem is centered on your practices, your behaviors as educators. And if a student is experiencing discrimination in your school, they're experiencing marginalization in your school, that is where you focus. The student's identity is not the problem. A person's identity is never a problem. We have to be really clear about that. The problem is how the world treats people because of their identities. That is the problem. So don't take that problem and make it the Black students' problem. Make it the LGBTQ plus students' problem. Make it the student who's the English learner's problem. It's not their problem. It's the way in which we treat people. That's the problem. So again, it's really important when people are trying to draw those links that you say, absolutely, that's not true. No, it's not true. And start to then interrogate how you treat students who are members of that group. How do you serve students who are members of that group? Because I would argue you're then not serving them. And we're seeing the result of that. We're seeing the impact of that. And then finally, the deficit-based attribution that we see so much of are the unalterable. There are obviously circumstances, events, and in children's lives, in the lives of families that we cannot change, that we can't fix. If a student is living in poverty, we can't change that, right, as educators in the building. If a student has a parent who is incarcerated, we can't change that in the building. What's important about unalterable factors or unalterable attributions, we can acknowledge that and be clear that we are still not absolved of our responsibility to serve and support that student. Because you'll have maybe team members that say, Johnny's having difficulty reading because Johnny's parent is in jail. Okay, I'm gonna just step back and say, can we first look at how Johnny is being taught reading? Can we start there? Where's that responsibility? How do you know? It is a way to not be responsible. It is a way to not be responsible for the work that you can do as educators in the building. Now, I'm not saying that a student who has a parent who is incarcerated and a student who is living in poverty or has some other unalterable condition that's happening in their lives that we should just ignore that. I want to be really clear. We're not saying that. What I'm saying is that if that student needs support to help cope, manage, have intervention with the stress of having this condition happen in their lives, having this circumstance in their life, we absolutely need to do something about that. We absolutely need to support that. But what we won't do is use it as a reason to do nothing. We won't use it as a reason to do nothing. That is the problem. So in all of these deficit-based attributions, what you find are ways in which we as educators let ourselves off the hook for educating our students. More than that, we find ways to center the problem with who they are so that we're not responsible for it. And what we're saying in culturally responsive problem solving is we don't do that. We don't do that. We are responsible. Our students and who they are, that is not the problem. Our inability to respond to them is the problem, and that's what we need to fix. That's what we need to fix. So when we have these kinds of attributions manifest themselves, we have to address it. We have to address it. Some people say, well, okay, somebody on the team was talking about, Johnny lives in poverty or whatever. Like, how is that going to impact anything? How is that going to have any impact on what we actually need to do? What our research tells us in terms of attributions, particularly with educators. If educators hold attributions in which they don't think that they have any control, they don't have any control over that factor, they are much less likely to intervene, much less likely to do anything. If I think the problem is that Johnny lives in poverty, what am I going to do about that? Why would I change my practices if Johnny lives in poverty? If Johnny's Black, and Black students, they struggle. So why would I change my practice when I know like Black students struggle? The logic of the thinking is, this is not my problem. And so you have to address it, because what happens on teams, I didn't pull this research into here, but what happens on teams, you'll find that when we see these kinds of deficit-based attributions, when they're talked about on teams literally become less effective, even if they are effective teams. They literally like lose the ability to problem solve, because you know why? They don't see a reason. They don't see a reason. So we have to reframe. We have to address these and move that kind of thinking out of our process when we're working to support students. So how do we start to do that? This is when you need to develop healthy relationships as colleagues, that you are a critical supporter of your colleagues so that you can say something. I am not going to go into a whole apparatus of a tool that you need to do. This is literally interrupting the thinking in the moment with your words. That's what we're talking about. And when I go through these, you'll be able to say, okay, yeah, that makes sense, but we don't do it. So when we have unfounded attributions, remember, this is when we don't have any evidence. In the moment, you may have a team member to say, yeah, that parent doesn't even care about that child, that parent, whatever, right? Or that child is, whatever. So that parent doesn't care about that child. Let's go with that answer, with that example. As a team member, as a colleague, in that moment, you can say, we do not have evidence to support that this parent does not care about their child. We know that parents care about their children, and we're gonna get rid of this way of thinking right here in this moment. That's what we're gonna do. We're going to directly address this right here in this moment to make sure that this is not going to impact how we continue to think about kids and families. So anytime a person is coming to you with statements or attributions for which we have no evidence, you can even just simply go as far as saying, we have no evidence for that to be true, so we cannot operate on that way of thinking. You don't even need to go any further. If we say that we're informed, if we say that we are, systematic problem solvers, we're not going to go on just your hunches, your assumptions, your feelings. We can't operate that way. So even if you're not willing or able to go further to get into the stereotype thinking or whatever is fueling this kind of thinking, at least say we don't have the evidence, so we cannot in any way operate on that kind of thinking as a team. Untrue. This is when you want to actually point out accurate information. There is no evidence that Black students are prone to higher rates of behavior difficulties than students of other racial groups. When you have people asserting that the Black students are just more problematic, they have more behavioral difficulties, when in actuality, no, that's not true. Actually, that's not true. We would need to know that information. We need to know that research in order to, again, break that connection that's being made. We're not going to tie Black student identity to the reason why they're having behavior problems. And if you want to say, well, we are seeing a higher rate of behavior difficulties among Black students, I'm going to say, then tell me about your management. I'm going to say, tell me about your discipline policies. I'm going to say, tell me about your instruction. Not tell me more about what you think is wrong with Black people and Black students. Because that's not what I do know is if you don't have effective classroom management, you're going to have higher behavior problems. That's what I do know. So we are clear about that. So we're not going to, again, operate on these kinds of stereotypes, inaccurate information in order to fuel how we actually problem solve. And then finally, with unalterable. Yes, there may be a factor that we cannot change, but then the question is, so what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're not going to just say, oh yeah, this student, you know, parent is incarcerated, or yeah, this student parent, you know, student lives in poverty. I really don't know. Like, there's just not much we can do here. No. We're going to now focus on what we can do. Is the student experiencing poverty-related stress? And we need to help support that. Or is it that the student living in poverty has nothing to do with the fact that they're having reading difficulties? It's the fact that you're not using effective instructional strategies. So we have to make sure we focus on what is it that we can do so that we're living up to our responsibilities as educators. So in this process, we're not asking for new tools. We're not asking for more money. We're not asking for resources. We're asking for courage. We're asking for courage to say in those moments, we are not going to blame and denigrate and pathologize people for our failure. That's what we're asking for. Just courage to be able to say these things to your colleagues in a way that's supportive. In a way that's supportive. Because we're not any better than the person sitting next to us. So how can we be supportive of our colleagues when we're trying to point these things out so that they don't continue to influence the way we're thinking about problems, the way we're thinking about how we support kids and families? We're asking for courage. When you hear these types of attributions, that you say something, that you disrupt that way of thinking and move it back to facts, move it back to reality, move it back to your responsibility as educators. So I have a couple scenarios. We're gonna maybe do one. Let's do one because I wanna make sure we have enough time. I wanna be cognizant of time. Well, you know what? I'm gonna go for it. Let's go for two, and then we'll just see how it goes. I like the scenarios, okay? So this is a situation that you might commonly find, you know, happening in school-based settings. And what I want us to do is just kind of think through, can we recognize deficit-based attributions? Can we recognize when they are untrue, unfounded, or unalterable, which is not significant, but, you know, can I recognize when they're happening? And can I think about how I would reframe it? What would I say? Okay, so I'm gonna read it out loud, but certainly please feel free to read it also on the screen. I'm gonna just move my little window here. Ms. Smith comes to the problem-solving team with a concern about Robert, a white male student in her 4th grade classroom. Below is a description of her concerns. Robert is reading below grade level, and he is exhibiting a number of disruptive behaviors in class. He is oftentimes talking to other students, does not follow directions, and will sometimes talk back to me, which causes big disruptions in class. I tried talking to him and keeping him in for recess, but nothing seems to work. I think it's getting worse. I reached out to mom a few times, but I've not heard back from her. I know she and her boyfriend were having some problems, so there may be something there, I don't know. I'm not sure if she even knows what's going on with Robert, poor kid. So I need some help because I do not know what else to do. So I want you to read that and reflect on these questions. What do you think is the teacher's view of the cause of the problem here, like the attribution? What do you think that the teacher thinks is the reason why Robert is having these difficulties? Is that deficit-based? You know, meaning that it's manifesting in unfounded, untrue, unalterable attributions. Is there a need to do any reframing here? Is there a need to do any reframing here? And if so, how would you go about doing it? How would you reframe? So I just want you to take a second and think about that. What's the teacher's view? Is it deficit-based? Do you think there's a need to reframe? Okay. Teresa, I'm going to do something amazing and ask for people to give me their thoughts on these questions and see what they say. So does anybody want to give a shot at what the teacher's view of the cause of the problem is? Maybe if you can use raise hand or the chat, and Teresa can just call it out if possible. What is the teacher's view of the cause of the problem in this situation? Are we getting any takers?
Not yet.
Okay.
Oh, we've got a hand. Michelle, Leah, if you want to go ahead.
Okay.
So I think that one of the problems that she sees is that that Robert is causing disruption and that disruptive behavior might be the cause of his reading problems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What else are we seeing as attributions?
Well, for sure, she has the unfounded / untrue / unalterable problems with his family life.
slash. Yes. So let's walk it through. Yes, Michelle, Leah. So what is it that the teacher is sort of communicating here in terms of the cause of the problem? She's alluding to something's going on with Robert's family. Mom has a boyfriend. Something's going on over there. I don't know what, but I've now dropped that in the air. And to say, okay, something's happening there that's really out of my control. I don't know what it is. Okay. Now, when that happens, then again, that is an example of a deficit-based attribution. And is it true? Is there something going on at home? Is there actual family turmoil that's creating behavioral challenges for Robert at the school? We don't have any evidence that that's true. Do you know that at all to be true? One, do you know anything about what's going on with mom and the boyfriend? Do you know that that has anything to do with what Robert is doing in the classroom? And the degree to which we don't ask that question and push that people actually have evidence of these things, that this is actually true, we cannot adopt it in our way of thinking. We would have to address that with Ms. Smith. You're making assumptions about what's happening at home and that in general, and further assuming that it is related to what's happening with Robert's performance. That's what we would have to say to our team. We would have to say this out loud. You're making an assumption. Now, you might say, okay, the teacher might say, well, that's just what I think. Have you had any contact with the parent? No, I haven't. Okay, so that's how we know that you're making an assumption this is not true. If you do think that there's something significant going on, then absolutely, we would want to know that, and we would want to try to get some support to address if there's family turmoil. What we won't do, though, is make an assumption. That's what we won't do. We won't sit here and assume, not know, and then operate on that way of thinking. That's what we won't do. That's the purpose of trying to make sure we understand when people are operating on assumptions or information that for which we have no evidence. So we will literally have to say that we're making assumptions here. Now, either do we need to collect more data, gather more evidence, or we're going to not operate on this assumption.
Markeda, we have another raised hand.
Okay.
Amy Christensen.
Mm-hmm.
I also wonder too if
Amy, we're having a hard time with your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
We can hear you now, Amy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear
I'm
you.
sorry, I'm trying to use my AirPods because I have children doing virtual learning in my space. But I wonder, related to the comment earlier about how we use these assumptions to pathologize children and their families, could it also be possible that maybe her assumptions about what's going on with the student is also influencing her classroom management strategy and why he might be quote unquote disruptive and battling her because she's thinking that he's, has all these terrible things and she's not doing what she needs to do to be stronger in her classroom management with him. So that's perpetuating the problem as well.
Absolutely. And that also is certainly another way in which we need to understand what's happening when people's thinking is informed in a way that they're going to blame the kids and blame the families. I'm not really responsible. It doesn't matter what I do here. It doesn't matter what I do here. I could have the best classroom management and this kid is still going to have a problem because mom's the problem. So it can impact your ways of engaging in a whole host of domains. So absolutely, because you're not the problem. It's nothing that you're doing that is contributing to this. So absolutely, it could be that she is even unaware that her management is contributing to what's also happening in the classroom, which is why we want to focus back in on what is happening in the classroom. What are you doing? That's why we want to go back to that. We want to focus on that and pull away from this notion that I'm going to just assume that something's going on at home and that means that we really don't have a role here. We need to actually stop that as a team and go back to what's actually happening in the classroom. Okay, let's look at another example. Mr. Wallace comes to the problem-solving team with a class-wide concern. Below is his description. I need some help with the behavior problems in my class. So this is class-wide. The students get out of their seat all the time. Sometimes they just walk out of the classroom. They are constantly talking to each other and it's just hard to get them to listen and get any work done. There are a few ringleaders that get it all started, but I just don't know what else to do. I tell them to get back to work. I've kept a few of them after school and I know sending them to the office sometimes, and I do send them to the office sometimes, but that isn't really doing anything. I know we've had more kids coming into the school from the South Side, which is a predominantly Black neighborhood with families with low incomes. And this is a different environment from what they might be used to, but we have to do something. So I want you to just reflect on those same questions. What is it that the teacher is communicating, that he thinks is the problem, i.e. the attribution, the cause of the problem, I'm sorry. Is that unfounded, untrue, and unalterable? And do you think there's a need to reframe? If so, how would you reframe? So I'll open it up to questions again, Teresa, to see if anybody wants to go with this second one. What is the teacher's view of the cause if you read this scenario?
Caitlin? If you want to unmute yourself.
Hey there. All right. So I'm seeing a lot of like, they're from another area. This is something different. And that is the attribution. They're new. There's something, their old school did this differently. We're just, we're doing it different over here. The attribution I think is unfounded and probably untrue. And that they have no idea about the previous school or about anything that's coming just from speculation. And I think a lot of the reframing is just like, what are you doing to engage your students? And if we have new students from a new school, do they feel a sense of community or belonging? Are they just trying to get out of your room? Like, is that, like, if you keep sending them away, is that their antecedent for behavior? Like,
Caitlin, I want to say as many times as I have talked about this, I don't know anybody ever said it, are they trying to get out of your room? But that could be.
That's a thing. Yeah, it's like, have you created any reason for them to want to be in your classroom? And if you keep sending them away.
Yes, on all of those are all of yes. So this notion that there's something about these Black students from the South Side, something about them. I don't know what, I know this must be different for them. I don't know what, but that is like the reason why they're not able to sit down and listen and pay attention and not be disruptive in my classroom. And again, you want to make sure, even as a team, we're wanting to name the fact that you're referring to Black students whose families are largely living with low incomes. We want to name that for what it is. We're not going to pretend that we're not talking about the Black students who live on the South Side. So we're not going to let you cover over that language in any way. We need to be really clear that these are the students that you're referring to, and that link that these students would not understand school-based settings and educational settings is an untrue deficit-based attribution that you're making. There's no reason to assume that these kids would not understand what it means to be in a classroom, okay, and what it means to sit down and be a learner in a classroom. Do you want to learn more about their previous school experiences and incorporate that in a strengths-based way? Please, yes, absolutely. But what we're not going to do is, again, create a deficit-based way of thinking associated with something about who these students are. That's what we're not going to do. And so we want to interrupt that thinking. We want to break that connection in that moment, and really just tell the teacher that the fact that more Black students who live in your class or who are in your class who are living in poverty is not the reason for the increased difficulties, but let's focus in on what you're doing with your management. Let's look at that.
We have one other question. Augustina,
Yes.
if you want to unmute yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to support the last person, that the teacher is a kind of attributing the cause of her inability to manage the class to the student neighborhood, to their
Yes.
culture, instead of focusing on some pedagogical commitments to help the student grow, and not just to, oh, it's coming from the environment, it's how they feel, it's about their culture. What are you putting into, help the student change? So it's more on her to the student.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're trying to get the reframe to be. And that's not even though these examples are, like I'm giving, like coming in with a class-based perspective and saying like the teacher, what happens with teams is that everybody sees it the same way. So remember the point that I made before about teams coming together for part being the purpose to reduce like bias, right? Like we'll be able to better interrupt that because we're bringing people together of different perspectives. No, what happens on teams is that they share in the bias, they share in the stereotypes. It becomes like a group level thinking in all the ways that we hope for it not to be the case. You will have, even like for school psychologists, for example, who come into the classrooms to try to help and address some of these issues, they'll come into the classroom and would rather focus on, let's do something to try to fix what's going on with these students instead of addressing the management. That is when we're marginalizing kids and families. That's when we're furthering oppression. When we hold kids responsible for the limitations, the need for professional growth and development of educators, we would rather hold kids accountable for that than address that with educators. And I'll have school psychologists, say to me, well, I really didn't want to offend the teacher by talking about their classroom management. Oh, but you're willing to limit opportunities and access for kids. You would rather do that than think that you're hurting another adult's feelings about helping them grow in their professional work so that they become more effective. That's the choice that you're making. And we make that choice over and over and over and over again. We will, our minoritized youth, our most marginalized communities are always at the expense of people who are unwilling to change and be better in their roles and responsibilities. We sacrifice them every single day. And that's just something we need to sit with. Literally. We would rather create the problem being with a child rather than hold an adult responsible. How is that even happening? It happens because of who the kids are. We look at them as throwaway. We don't care enough. That's what we're doing. So as we move down this way of thinking, we're saying, no, we're going to hold educators responsible. All of us. What we promised to deliver. And so even back to Caitlin's point where the kids are leaving the classroom, I don't understand why we don't get it when, Black and brown families are angry with their educational systems. Look at the quality of them. Yes, you should be angry. Should I be happy with this? No. I want you to be happy in the underserving that you're getting and don't complain about it. No, we're not going to continue to do that. We cannot continue to do that. So these are steps that help us say, who's responsible here? Who's responsible here? We are. We're responsible. We are to change, we are to adapt, we are to modify, we are to meet the need. And we will not pathologize our kids and families. That's what we're saying that we're going to do. So you can do that in any work. You can do that anywhere, in any work that you do. And so when we start to reframe, interrupt that thinking, we still have to problem solve. We still got to go through the process. Just so you all know, we still are at just a problem identification. I just want to just say that out loud, okay? This is like the beginning. But, you know, once we reframe and we start to interrupt that thinking with those attributions, we do have to come up with, well, what are the actual causal or contributing factors? So you'll never hear me say students aren't actually having behavioral or academic or social emotional mental health difficulties. That is very real. You know, your kids could really, the kids in the classroom really could be, you know, very disruptive, misbehaving, having academic difficulties, behavioral, social emotional difficulties, so on and so forth. So we actually do need to know how to effectively problem solve. So once we are able to push and start down a road of not pathologizing and blaming kids and families, that we're going to be responsible, how do we start to make that a clear systemic part of our problem solving process? And one way we do that when we're talking about identifying the problem is to first identify low inference hypotheses. These are again, similarly, we're talking about the factors that are contributing to or causing the problem. Remember, we're trying to rethink how we approach our understanding of problems. So we don't want to do it in a deficit-based way. What we want to develop are low inference hypotheses that are alterable, things that we can change and do something about. So essentially, a hypothesis is basically, an inference that we're making about what we think is contributing to or causing the problem. Okay, that's not deficit-based. That's what we're trying to do. And those hypotheses should be focused on, obviously, the causal factors, as I'm saying. They should be alterable, things we can actually change. So this gets us out of saying we can't do anything about it. We're going to focus on our instruction. We're going to focus on curriculum, our task, the student skills, classroom management, any of those factors in the learning ecology that we can actually change. We want to make sure we focus on them and that they're low inference. And low inference is really important. And I'm going to just say a little bit about that. Low inference compared to high inference hypotheses. High inference hypotheses, which we use a lot, are basically inferences that we make that are based on more within person factors, things that are very difficult to measure, get a handle on. So you'll talk about like personality factors, psychopathology, aptitude, IQ, like, oh, this person has like a lower IQ and that's why they're struggling with reading. Actually, you can't even make that kind of link really with using IQ data, like using IQ scores. Saying people don't care, that they're lazy, is very difficult to measure that and then link it to the actual problem that's happening in the classroom. So that is not that we will never have high inference hypotheses. The key piece is that we don't start there. We never start there. We focus in on low inference. What are the factors that are most close, most proximal to the actual manifesting concern? So what do I mean by that? With low inference, we're talking about directly observable and linked factors to the problem. So if I have a student who's struggling in reading, where's the first place I need to go? I need to look at reading instruction and curriculum. That's where I start. I don't leapfrog over that and say, well, I know like Johnny's mom was having some difficulties. How do we jump all the way over like the curriculum and instruction? Or like, does the student have the requisite skills in order to know how to comprehend on grade level? Like, why would we jump over that? So you have to start with factors that are most closely related to the actual presenting concern. And in school-based settings, that is going to force us to start with the learning ecology, instruction, curriculum, task, management, student skills. It forces us to start there. So that's an important piece when we're focusing on creating low inference hypotheses. So let's look at that as an example. Johnny is in the 4th grade, but he's comprehending at the 2nd grade level. because his reading is not fluent. Okay. Now that because his reading is not fluent part, that's the hypothesis. That's what we're saying is the reason why Johnny is not comprehending on grade level. Okay. So now when you look at that, does that seem low inference or high inference to you? We're saying that Johnny isn't comprehending on grade level because he's not reading fluently. Is not reading fluently a high inference or a low inference hypothesis? It is low inference. It is fluency is directly linked to comprehension. So now our intervention would be what? What would be our intervention? Improving Johnny's reading fluency. When we improve Johnny's reading fluency, Johnny's comprehension should go up. Instead of, yeah, I don't think Johnny really cares about reading. He doesn't have a love for it. Okay. What like it just like when we get into these high inference and even when that might be fueled by stereotypes or prejudices or whatever, those things are very difficult to intervene on. It's very difficult to do anything about. And it leaves teams really like searching out for reasons that they ultimately come to that are ineffective, that lead to ineffective intervention. So let's look at the opposite of that. Michelle is continuing to get out of her seat without permission and talking to other students because she acts like that at home. Now we hear that a lot. She acts like that at home. Is that low inference or high inference? That's gonna be high inference. We might not even know how Michelle acts at home. And as a matter of fact, yes, my daughter acts very differently at home than she does at school. We have less rules, we have less structure, all of those things. So that doesn't even align, okay? But we might say, yep, you know what, that's right. Yeah, what are we gonna do about that? Like she's been taught that. She's just, a parent is teaching it and that's just how she is. Let's just try to contain it, I guess, or, like where do you even go with it? What do you go with it other than further blaming the family? So how could you change that? Michelle is continually getting out of her seat without permission and talking to other students because Ms. Smith doesn't have classroom rules and expectations around being out of seat and talking to other students. The classroom management expectations are unclear. That would be your low inference. So what is the intervention to help Ms. Smith with her classroom management? That's your intervention. I don't need to do anything with Michelle. I'm intervening with Ms. Smith to help her address her classroom management difficulties. That's the difference. We're focusing on why we're not going to leapfrog over these proximal factors that can be most directly linked to impacting presenting concerns and presenting problems. And when we do this kind of thinking, low inference, alterable hypotheses, is antithetical to deficit-based attributions. They don't coexist. They cannot coexist. So if you as a team are systematically ensuring that you're developing low inference, alterable hypotheses, you've already taken a significant step forward to not even allow the use of deficit-based attributions to inform the problem-solving process because they can't exist at the same space. They're antithetical to each other. So the more we can teach our teams to do this, focus on what's proximal, focus on what's the responsibility of the educators in the class, in the school-based environment, then we move away from people being able to further blame and pathologize kids and families for who they are. So when we have that, we know what an intervention is. We know how to intervene. The interventions become much clearer to us in terms of what we need to do. Is this creating whole new toolkits? Not necessarily, not necessarily. It's better aligning the problem with the solution. When you have deficit-based attributions, you're really gonna have a difficult time finding an intervention for it because it's probably like a stereotype or prejudice or bias or something like that. You're gonna have a very difficult time identifying a solution, identifying an intervention, which teams do all the time. But this is why we're putting this process in place so that we have a clearer line between what the concern is, what the hypothesis is, and that hypothesis is telling us how to intervene. That's what we're doing. And so those are the two strategies. I know that was quick. I'm trying to make sure I monitor time. I think I'm okay right at 11:45, so we have enough time for discussion and questions. But basically what we walked through today is really trying to help us rethink the process of how we understand problems when they present, and that we do it in a way that does not pathologize and harm, but that we instead reframe deficit-based attributions when they occur, and then identifying the low inference alterable hypotheses gives us a clear path that is antithetical to deficit-based thinking in order to better problem solve and find more effective solutions, because that's going to help us to come up with ways to better support kids and families, which is what we're trying to do here. So with that, I'm all done. I'll open the floor for questions and discussions for our last 15 minutes together.
Thank you, Markeda. And if folks could please introduce themselves also before you ask your question, that would be really helpful. Just, either where you are from in the university or from outside the university. But yes, please introduce yourself when you ask your question.
Well, usually I don't do this, or I try to avoid doing it because I want others to speak. But I've got a burning question for you, Markeda. It's something that perhaps not surprising, given that I work at Curl. We talk about team-based. How do you build that dynamic, that culture of being able to call people in to say, hey, David, I hear that you're thinking that that's the cause, but I think you're wrong, and but how do you kind of build that within a team or within a larger school?
Yeah, there's a couple things I've seen in practice in working with districts and with individual schools in terms of what are some key turning pieces that makes this work. One is that the leadership in the building has to clearly be on board and committed to this way of thinking, to this notion of, whether we call it culturally responsiveness, or you want to call it social justice, or you want to call it cultural competence, whatever that broad term your area is using, there's an expressed commitment to this, and we're not moving off of it. We're going to do it. So that comes from leadership. When that happens, then everybody in the building is trained. Everybody in the building goes through these kinds of trainings to understand, at least fundamentally bias, stereotypes, and prejudice, to understand how they manifest themselves, to understand how to critically self-reflect, and to understand that all of us participate in that and no one is exempt from it. All of us participate, so all of us have to support each other. And so today I might make a mistake on a team and articulate a deficit-based attribution, but tomorrow it could be you. That kind of training with the entire staff in a systemic way is the way to start to get people comfortable. Because I've been in situations where they want to just train the school psychologist, and they want the school psychologist to go in and be the person on the team, the one person. No, everybody has to go through it. Ideally the full staff, but it's certainly the full team needs to go through this process so that they develop the understanding and then start to have the disposition to know, as colleagues, this is how we support each other. This is not us calling each other out. This is not us shaming each other. This is not us embarrassing each other. We have to support each other. Just like if you were talking about an interpretation in a score report that's not accurate, I might say, oh, that's not accurate. Just like you would, we have to be as comfortable with that as we are with saying, I understand what you're saying, but this is not true because X, Y, and Z. So even like the way you sort of saying it as an example when you were asking the question, even that is enough to just start to get it out, you know what I mean, and get it on the table. And then you have to have a culture where there's not retaliation. That's why leadership matters. That there's not going to be, okay, now we're going to go and gossip about this person over to the side, or we're going to name call this person. So creating a culture of trust and community has to also occur for it to infiltrate into the school. So where I've seen it work most is an express commitment from leadership that we're doing this. This is something we all are committed to. They're a part of the work. The teams at least are trained in this together. They know it together. They can ask the questions together. They can share their concerns and their fears together. That's going to build their comfort with each other to do it. And then it's like starting to take the baby steps. Let's start. We're going to take a couple steps. We're going to start and know that it's going to take some time because it's a vulnerability, right? It's a vulnerability there. But what I always say as you're learning to do this, because I say it's what we're asking for is courage, and I understand that. And I mean that in a way that it takes courage because you haven't done it before. You might be nervous. It's not courage because it's not courage because it's so difficult or something like. It's not that. Because it doesn't, in my mind, take courage to do the right thing. It doesn't take courage to do the right thing. I understand though that it might take some time for you to find your voice, find your language, find your footing, and we want to support each other while we do that, right? That we're going to support each other while we do that. So in a nutshell, it comes with collaborative training and growth in the area. You can't just have one person on the team that's like learned it and they're going to affect everybody else. That doesn't happen. That doesn't work. That one person is going to be too much pressure, you know, for one person. So everybody has to be committed and go through the same process of learning and growth and development. That's how the teams come together and trust each other. Yeah. Augustina, I can see you. I don't know, Teresa, if you were looking at somebody else, but I see her on my screen with her hand.
Yeah,
raised.
sorry. I forgot to unmute myself. Yes, please go ahead, Augustina.
Dr. Newell, thank you for this beautiful, superb, and helpful presentation. It's amazing.
You're welcome.
I mean, I'm thinking, given that some of the scenarios of this deficit thinking and deficit attribution we have been experiencing and hearing are related to parents and student culture. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of thinking if it would be helpful to have some kind of family or school community engagement to bring the family to the school and include them in the school or some kind of decision making, you know, to also get their own part of this whole issue.
Yes, I agree with you 1000%. One of the things when I've worked with schools at the school-wide level, like the full staff, one of the exercises that we go through is that I ask them, what messages do you think you communicate to your families? You know, and how do they know you care about them? How do they know that? And they'll say, well, we hold family nights and we hold parent teacher conferences and we're always available and we, you know, like and then I'll say, well, but how do you know? There is no input back from the family into the system. So what you think, what you believe is helpful, is good, is showing support, could actually not be doing that. It could not be communicating at all, and actually it could be communicating the opposite. But because you have no feedback loop that comes from families back into the system, you don't know. You live in your view. It's never interrupted. So every time I say, please create your feedback mechanisms. Where can your families come back and say, this feels supportive, this doesn't. This is helpful to us as a family. This isn't. I felt like this when I came in the building. Can we talk about that? And you honor that and not get defensive, right? Like, where is the mechanism to get that information back into the building? We don't typically have that as clearly delineated. Some schools might do surveys, like parent surveys or something. It may not go as far as bringing parents in for focus groups or, you know, actually having more robust ways of getting the input back into. And not only that, as you're saying to your point, Augustina, where are they in the creation of? You know, where are they in the creation of? These are our mechanisms to show outreach and support to our families and making sure that we're having a diverse way in which we're doing that. We don't have that as much. And it's not absent because we know homeschool community engagement is important. It's not absent. It's just that we have to recognize the value of that mechanism. It is really, 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 really important. If you want to say that you are going to center kids and families, if you're centering kids and families, they're at the center of how decisions are made and they're getting you feedback. It's not just the educator saying, well, I think this is what people want. I think this is what they like. You know, you're imposing then your view onto other people when you do that. And then you're not getting a loop back in that lets you know that this is not working. So I agree with you absolutely, completely. Creating mechanisms for input as well as feedback are critical if you're trying to support kids and families in more robust ways. And then when they tell you the truth, that you honor it, right? You hear it. You don't say, no, you're wrong. I do care about you. No, I don't feel that way. So that's the other piece. Can you hear it? Can you honor it? can you then respond and say, how can I do better? We are in service to the kids and families that we serve. We are in service to them. That is literally your job. So if it's not working for them, it's not working for us. Other questions? No.
There were some questions earlier in the chat about like, who do you work with, who implements it? And I know you, in answering my question, I think you kind of talked about it. You really need a whole school buy-in, so leadership.
Yeah.
But do you work primarily with the school psychologist, with the special education team? Do you work with like kind of operationally? And I suppose there's probably, I'm going to guess that there's multiple avenues depending on the school.
Multiple avenues. So some of this work, like I was mentioning, with the State Department of Public Instruction, that's all working with the policy making people, at the state level to start to codify and create this at the larger level. But if it's in the schools, it depends on what the schools I'm going to just generally describe it as their professional development plan. I work with some schools and some districts rather, where they are everybody in their building, all the way from facilities through the superintendent, go through all of these types of sessions and trainings throughout the year. So every single person, because their commitment is that every adult is responsible for equity. And so every adult needs to understand equity. So those are like year-long processes. But then there are certainly lots of times where I'm just working with specific groups of people. Like it could be just a school psychologist, just a group of teachers, even kids, like, we want, our high school students, to learn about this as well, or something like that. So it varies and depends on what the plan is for the school. But what is optimal is sustained engagement that includes everybody. So you don't have like 5 people that have to try to carry the weight. Any other questions? I think we got a time, like maybe for 1 or 2 more.
Leanne,
I'll go ahead. Leanne Calamine from the School of Ed. Thank you so much, Markeda. It's great to
miss you.
And lots of other colleagues.
Yes.
My question is a bit of a leap from your presentation, but since we're all in a higher ed space, I was thinking about this in K-12, and I know that's what you're talking about, but I wonder if you might also talk and take a leap of how this applies in higher ed, working with undergrads and graduate students.
Yeah.
I know I found myself thinking about, I have the student that's not logging in or isn't responding to emails, and how quick you can jump to assumptions.
Yes.
And obviously we don't have problem solving teams in place in the same way. But I think we definitely engage in deficit thinking and make those high hypotheses. And so just if you could speak a little bit about what we might do in higher ed.
Yeah, see, you're pushing me because I just like to stay with the babies, because adults, no, I'm just joking. I think I agree. Like it certainly applies to any person who is, an educator or professional who is working to serve other people. How do you think about the people you serve? That's really the core issue. And so for faculty, for administrators, for staff, we have to also check our way of thinking about people. So if that student isn't logging in, I would just say, like, my first thing, I would just share for you myself, my first thing that I've learned, and this is like more unique to higher ed, is I always ask, are they okay? Like, that's my first thought. Like, not why aren't you doing this, or where are you, or you're not responding. I'm like, are you okay? That's the first thing I'll respond out and start thinking more the lines of, do I need to call the care team? You know what I mean? I'm thinking about that as a first, not like that you don't care about it and you don't do this. And I have learned that as a faculty member in higher ed. I think I did not, even for all the work that I, like the way I think about it when I'm thinking about K-12 is so salient for me. But when I became a faculty member, I think I thought, okay, you're an adult, you should be responsible, you should be doing this, and losing that same like sense of like, just humanity even, right? Like for what people might be experiencing. I didn't do that right away when I first started as a faculty member, but I have learned that these are the same attributions that are manifesting themselves. And I do, even when I'm like, I changed the way I grade because I realized, because of some of my own biases, when I grade, I might tend to be more harsh in my grading with Black students, let's say, for example, if that's happening to me. I know now, because because of implicit bias, not only do I grade the first time, I go back and look at it again, and I look at how was I grading across the students? Was I fair? Was I too hard on this student versus this student, and why? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I know that I hold biases, so I have to do that. And I learned that as a way of my process. No, but we didn't have I didn't have a team, like, or somebody to go to say, where do I go to like learn like that? But I agree with you. I think this has lots of applications to higher ed, and probably even could be more applicable with the ways in which we think about these are adults, like they're 18, I'm gonna say whatever, 18, you should be more responsible in the way we, may hold them accountable and not think about the ways we pathologize them. We are certainly capable, and we certainly do that in higher education. And I think this work does apply to that in a very systemic way. But I would want to think about like, how could we, I guess maybe faculty professional development could be more centered specifically around this to help teach that. But I had to learn that on my own as a faculty member. I did not come in actually just automatically applying this way of thinking to my work as a faculty member. It's a really great question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Well, I think we're about at time. Markeda, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I will send you the chat also. You got some really rave reviews, so you can take a look at that. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And everyone, please feel free. You'll get an email with the link, and then please join us for upcoming seminars. You can sign up on our website.
Thank you all so much. It was fantastic. Thank you.